everyone. Welcome to the April 24th, 2025 meeting of the Infrastructure Oversight Board. As always, there will be a time period for public comment. You'll have a total of 3 minutes to speak, and you can either talk via in person or via telephone. If you'd like to, you can call now, 818-238-3335. And we will go ahead and move on to the flag salute. Just to let our viewers know, that's not your TV buzzing. That is happening here in the City Hall. They're doing some work, so don't check your connections. Roll call, please.
Armin Avazian?
Here.
Maria Coronado?
Here.
Dwayne Gilmore?
Here.
Linda Besson?
Here.
Jean Schonberger?
Here.
Shane Weber?
Here.
And Colin Hoffmeister is absent today.
Great, thank you. And moving on to announcements.
Madam Chair, no staff announcements tonight.
Great, thank you, Mr. Bergman. And any public comment?
There are no public comments.
No, great, thank you. And so we will move on to the consent calendar, approval of the March 27, 2025 IOB meeting minutes. Any comments, changes, questions on those minutes?
Yeah, we're out.
Could I get a motion to approve them?
I'll move.
Right, thank you. And a second?
Second.
Great, thank you. Call for the vote, please.
Armin Avazian?
Yes.
Maria Coronado?
Yes.
Dwayne Gilmore?
Yes.
Shane Weber?
Abstain.
Linda Besson?
Yes.
And Jean Schomburger.
Yes.
Thank you. That's 6 yeses and 1 abstention from Colin.
Actually, 5 yeses.
Sorry, 5
That's
yeses.
okay. Yes, thank you. And then reports to the board.
Yes, Madam Chair, board members, as I mentioned before, we like to show off our good work from time to time and update everybody, yourselves and the public, on projects when we can. We have a very interesting one to share with you tonight, and also go over the life cycle of a sample here of our capital projects. And Mr. Li-Fan Xu will present, our Chief Assistant Public Works Director and City Engineer.
Hi, good evening, Chair Besson and IOB members. Tonight I'm going to present the Grand Oaks Signal Project as an example to illustrate the life cycle of a CIP. So typically, projects are broken down into 3 phases: planning, design, and construction. I'm going to use the Grand Oaks Signal Project to explain this in detail. However, I want to add quickly that sometimes you have more phases that was added within these 3 main ones. For example, sometimes a bigger project spends years at securing funding. So naturally, those projects will have an initiation phase within the planning phase. And sometimes you'll see project listed the bid between design and construction. For our setup, we put the bid and award process under construction. That's because under the standard design bid bill, the bid process is typically very standard and uneventful. However, for alternative delivery methods such as design build or construction manager at risk, those are more involving and more time consuming. So for those projects, it makes sense to list the bid as a separate process between design and construction. And at last, you also see some project has a closeout phase at the end of construction. And that's because some projects does have a very distinct closeout phase. For example, commissioning of a new water reclamation plant can be a whole phase by itself because it requires to turn on the plant at a very specific sequence, and it needs to conduct a series of testing to make sure everything is working as intended. Involve on-the-job training of plant personnel, and the plant needs to be in operational for a period of time to work out all the kinks. And so this process can sometimes take months, even up to a year, before the contractor can turn the plant fully to the operator. So with that said, we're going to keep things simple, and we are going to look at the Granules project through the lens of these three phases. The first phase is planning, and this is where we set up project objectives and preliminary budget and scope, as well as security funding and approval. For the Granules project, the project scope is a gradual and lateral match of city goals and Measure R funding objectives. There are several programs under the Measure R, but for the Granules project, the one we focus on is the Measure R Highway Multi-Module Operational Improvement Program. Its funding objective is to fund traffic signal synchronization, pedestrian, bicycle, transit, and roadway improvement. That fits very well with the city goals in its 2035 general plan. For example, policy 1.6, use technology, intelligent transportation system to improve street capacity and efficiency as an alternative to street widening, or policy 5.1, maximize pedestrian and bicycle safety, accessibility, and connectivity, as well as policy 9.2, address the needs of people with disability and comply with the standard of American Disability Act. So, working with Measure R's administrative body, LA Metro, Granules projects emerge as an ideal location to apply for the grant. And at the end, the project is focused on 14 intersections for its traffic signal synchronization and pedestrian and bicycle improvement. 13 of the locations are on Granules Boulevard itself, and with the one location on First and Orange Grove. We fill out the application, secure Metro Board's initial approval, then take the funding agreement back to Council for approval. So once we have the funding at hand, we are off to the race. The second phase of the project is design. This is where we create the engineering plan, specification, and estimate, what we call PS&E. This is done by our design team, which consists of our consultant designer, our city project manager, Vicky Datian, as well as our traffic engineering manager, Edward Yu, along with other important stakeholders, such as the Transportation Division of Community Development Department, our own traffic management center personnel, along with Metro, who keeps an eye on the project's goal to make sure it fits within the funding agreement's guideline. So the design process looks a little bit like this. On the left-hand side, you can see under the input, this is only a snippet of the hundreds of documents that we feed through the design team. And I'm just going to explain what we're seeing on the screen a little bit for a minute. Going clockwise, on the upper left corner, that is the traffic count at Grand Oaks and Magnolia every 15 minutes at all directions and including all the turns. Going clockwise, the next one you see is one of the many standard plan the city use. This particular one provides guideline on the traffic backfill details. And going down is the Federal Highway Administration Manual, and this one provides guideline on the turn signal. And the last one on the lower left corner, the hand sketch you see is the investigation result of our field personnel on the traffic contour layout on the intersection of Grand Oaks and Magnolia. So this is really a tiny percentage of all the documents that the the design team has to consider in order to produce the perfectly engineered plan, and you see under the output. So this is only one of the page from the engineering plan. It lay out in perfect detail all the construction activity that needs to take place, as well as specify all the equipments and parts on the upper left corner in a schedule form, as well as existing traffic phases and proposed traffic phases and a lot of other important details in order for the project to be built. So along with the plans, there are 100 pages of technical specification, as well as the cost estimate, which we often have to do a bit of a value engineering to make sure the cost estimate fits within the budget. So with the plan, the specs, and the cost estimate in place, we are ready to turn the page to the next phase of the project, which is really the most exciting one, is the construction. So it will start with advertising the bids, which at this point, the law still requires us to advertise in a local newspaper, even though 99.9% of the contractor get their information online, which is where we conduct our bidding. So after we receive the bids, we need to do the evaluation to make sure we are awarded to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. The council will need to accept the PSNE and award the contract. Once the contract is executed and the purchase orders issued, there's still plenty of work to do before we can really start construction. And for this particular project, the submittal, review, and approval process is pretty lengthy because it requires review of all the subdrawings. A lot of traffic pole and capital part can have a lead time of 6 to 8 months minimum. So, and as well as we need to make sure the traffic control plan and the schedule works, we have to make sure everything is there for the construction before we can issue the notice to proceed for the contractor. Because once construction starts, any delay will cost major dollar. So we spend a lot of times during the pre-construction phase to make sure everything is there for the construction. And finally, we're ready for the construction. And one of the major components of this project is upgrade the traffic equipment up to today's standard. And as you can see here, many of the poles are smaller, and we need to construct a larger and more robust pole to support more operational equipment. And to do that, we first need to redo the foundation. In the left picture here, you see a crane is yanking out an old foundation out of the ground. A new one will be put in place, and a new traffic pole will be installed. So we have to do this because it's a Grand Oaks, a major street. We have to do this outside of the rush hour, and we try to fit everything that requires road closure within the 9 to 3 window. And as you can see, that allowed the crew to have a bit more room to work, but then also they really have to time everything well in order not to cause any delay. And in this picture, you see they're pulling wires. And a lot of the cities, wires and traffic conduit was originally installed in the 50s and 60s in galvanized pipe. So after decades, a lot of them are corroded and subject to frequent breakdown. So the thing of this is similar to a house repiping, where you replace your old galvanized pipe to a new copper. Same concept here. So we replace all the traffic wiring and conduit to today's standard, and to improve reliability. And the next picture is you see the workers are connecting the wire to the newly upgraded cabinet. All this equipment, including the cabinet, the new traffic loop, and all the video detection system, all is working together as one system to improve pedestrian, bicycle, as well as a vehicle traffic detection and synchronization. And in this picture here, you see a worker is up on a bucket truck, try to adjust one of the newly installed camera. So one of the major components for this project is to install more video detection camera. So we are capable of collecting more data and doing more data analysis, as well as our traffic management center is able to do real-time adjustment if necessary. And in this picture, they are preparing formwork for construction of new ADA ramp. So this is one of the 27 new ADA ramp that goes with this project, and that bring all the ramps within the limit of this project up to the standard of the ADA requirement. And this picture is a picture of pavement restoration. So for this project, most of the pavement is really limited to the work that's only necessary for the traffic signal synchronization and pedestrian and bicycle improvement. The reason being that a lot of consideration must be taken into account for pavement rehab. We're going to have a separate presentation on our pavement rehab program in a couple months to explain all the factors that goes into the consideration of our pavement rehab. Just give a very quick explanation, because we have to consider all the utility work that going to take place. We want to have the utility to go in before we do our payment, as well as when we're doing work on a particular street, we want to look at the payment condition in the context citywide to make sure we spend our dollar in the most efficient way. So another consideration for this project is Measure R has its own funding priority. For the most part, they're not going to fund any payment rehab outside of what's necessary for the traffic synchronization and pedestrian and bicycle improvement. So, any payment improvement beyond those will have to come from city fund. So that is also one of the considerations that we are doing limited payment work for this project. And in this picture here, you see they are laying down new striping. So for this project, we are doing high visibility striping for some of the more frequent travel intersection. As you can see here, they're laying down more of a ladder pattern crosswalk as opposed to the usual two-line. And at the end, we have this project is not one of those flashy projects. It's really aimed at efficiency, effectiveness, and reliability of our system. So in this picture, before and after, you have, as you can see, the traffic pole is now being bring up to standard that's capable of support a left turn signal that wasn't there before. As well as all the wiring underneath the intersection will replace, but you don't see. As well as the traffic cabinets are all upgraded. And if you see on the after picture, there's a new LED street light that was installed as part of this project that wasn't there before. That is also one of the major elements for this project. Is a lot of LED streetlights were installed at the intersection to provide more lighting for nighttime pedestrian. And in this picture, it's maybe a little bit more obvious. So as you can see, the old traffic signal is really substandard. And the new one not only is more visible, but also has a new left turn signal, as well as a new video camera that was installed on top of the traffic signal, and a new LED street light on top of the traffic signal pole. It's hard to see from the picture, but at the crosswalk of the far hand side, there wasn't a ramp there before. It was just a curve. Now a new ramp was installed on both sides of the crosswalk that comply to the ADA standard. As well, of course, all the wirings and the traffic cabinet were replaced and upgraded. And so at the end, the project was budgeted $6 million, and the final cost is $5.7 million. It's 100% funded by the Measure R Multi-Module Highway Operational Program Fund. The project was completed in March 2025, and that's a great job by our project manager, Vicky Datian, under the guidance of our traffic engineering manager, Edward Yield. So with that said, I conclude the presentation and ready for any questions from our dear members, IOB members.
Great, thank you so much. That was some great examples. Thank you. Any questions from the board? Go ahead.
Thanks for the presentation. I'm a civil engineer, so I enjoyed it more than most people. Just to sort of re-emphasize some of the points you made and to gush a little bit about the work that you do, it's a really compelling story that you told, and I just want to make sure that I'm able to sort of enhance it, if I may. Because it really kind of starts out from this inception point, understanding what's of use to the city of Burbank, and how we can use our resources collectively to improve the environment that we live in. And it actually, the whole arc of the story that you told involved funding, urban planning, sticking up for people who may struggle getting around our city. And it's a really, I think it's a really romantic story, actually. So I guess where my mind is going and where the question is going to end up on is, I think this is an industry that we need to encourage people to work in. I think that seeing people working with their hands, constructing things, building things, thinking about how people behave on the streets would be like an even bigger win for what we're collectively responsible for. Is there anything we're doing to encourage STEM careers or get people working in this industry? Is there anything like that that we could really continue to get behind?
Yes, board member Gilmore and board members, that's a romantic story myself, and I really enjoyed, and Mr. Hsu did a great job. Absolutely, yes, and encouraging young students to get into our careers is a big push personally for me. We, anything from, you might be familiar with the American Society for Engineering and Contractors, ACEC. I've personally done presentations on Be an Engineer to high schools, National Engineers Week in February. Here in Burbank, Mr. Ewan and I started 3 years ago, I think it was, and they have a program, remind me the name of it, I'm sorry.
Excuse me, CTE days.
Yes.
Are you
Career
familiar?
Technical
Yeah.
Education Days, and that happens in February also.
It happens in February at Burroughs and Burbank. It's like an open house.
At the two high schools, and we're real. Burbank Water and Power is there, and we are there. There's in the courtyards we set up basically kiosks, and our traffic sign team does a great job to bring the kids to us with just this array of signs, and the kids just love the signs. But as you mentioned, engineers are there, our field folks are there, because there's so many different careers in public works. And yes, we could take up this meeting for another 30 minutes talking about all the wonderful things that public works does and how we want to encourage our youth to have interest in STEM and the vocational, and we need all that talent for us to be able to deliver these types of projects to our community. So thanks for bringing it up.
Anyone else with a question?
Oh, go ahead.
Also wanted to congratulate everybody involved on a terrific project and a really compelling romantic story. To carry the romance theme, could you tell us a little bit about the delta in the 5.6 spend versus the $6 million budget? How were they able to achieve that cost savings?
Yeah.
Good evening. I apologize for my voice today. I'm suffering from a little laryngitis, but planning. If you don't have a plan, you're planning for disaster. That's what they say, right? And that's one of the key things where we can save the city resources. And one of the mechanisms that we used here, as Mr. Hsu said, is that the poles were very expensive and have a long lead time. And one of the things that we did, we took an opportunity before we even got a contractor on board. We took the opportunity to take some of the funding and order poles. This is before, if you know what's going on today, and probably will happen tomorrow, is an increase in price in labor and goods. We were able to order the poles like a year, in fact, ahead of time. And that saved us, I think the steel went up about 50% at that time, and labor went up. So we ordered the poles, but there were a lot of logistics involved with that. We had to store them in the yard, and we had to do all these different things to to really look ahead of how we could save money. So we were diligent in that. We saved a lot of money doing that. Now, does that cover the gap? No. There's many other factors, negotiating with the contractors, providing. We are very fortunate here in the city to have a great team of field people, traffic signal people, sign and striping people that are support Burbank, and they sometimes fill the gap on a lot of different things where we would have to go outside to a contractor to have them do the work. So we have that opportunity there. So there's many things that and just being efficient and making sure that we're working with the contractor and we're active in making sure that everything's done correctly.
So if I may, Madam Chair and board members, we do have a topic of the life cycle of a sample capital project. In hindsight, I should have titled this, including the Glen Oaks project. So for the public forum, we need to kind of limit it into that agenda item. And the way I'll answer this specifically to this agenda item for a life cycle, which very much involves this board every February and March, of course. In the life cycle, we do our best. I think you might have heard me say, if I could predict the future like that, I wouldn't be doing this job. But we try and predict the costs that are coming, and that's based on a snapshot in time and predicted possible cost escalation pressures with all our projects. But as Mr. Yu was saying, in times of spikes or unusual circumstances, we're not able to cost those out in real time. So in all likelihood, for your time here on the board, there are cycles, right? We all know there are cycles. There are going to be times we're coming to you and say, hey, these prices went up, these cost pressures happen. That's why sometimes our continued projects that we just went through have additional monies on top of just the regular construction. We've seen cost escalations come. And the other times, like this one example, where we wisely, which we do with our traffic signal projects, order infrastructure ahead of time to lock in that price. That allows us to make sure our budget, that we hit it and hopefully come in under it. So in the life cycle, it's with your review, very important for us to try and forecast costs and estimates as best we can. And they usually have, if we are underground, 15% contingencies that we go to council with, and if they're above ground, typically, I think 10.
Thank you so much. Really interesting. Apologies if you mentioned this at the beginning, but what was the duration of this project from start to finish?
If we talk about the life cycle, this one has a very interesting story. Its initial application to the Metro Board was 2016, 2017. And like I said, it's a gradual process of project scope. It start out as a smaller project, and then as you investigate it, it becomes necessary that this will be a bigger project. We go back to the LA Metro to say, hey, it's really beneficial that this become a bigger project. So we apply and get more funding in several steps. So the life cycle of this project is really from 2017 to 2025. The construction itself, however, is relatively compact. So it's only several months, but a lot of work went into preparation, planning, design to make sure the construction goes smooth. So that's why it's much better to spend the time up front so that we spend less time at the back end, because that will really save money at the end.
Thank you so much.
Just to extend, excuse me, pardon me, just to extend on that question a bit, approximately what was the hard cost to soft cost breakdown.
Okay, so the construction cost itself is 4.5 million. That's the contract with the general contractor. The material that we order ahead of time is about 800,000. So and then the software, the rest of it, the few 100,000 is design, inspection. So that's the breakdown.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Anyone else? I just have one quick question. In regard to the approval process prior to construction starting, you talked about internal here in Burbank. I assume because it's Measure R, does Metro have a say in approval of the project before it begins beyond just the funding? And is there anything other that we need to get approvals from in regard to the county or the state in that whole approval process?
So for this project, the way the Metro control the projects go is through funding. So if the city is, willing to put in its own fund to fund the portion that Metro is not willing to fund, then Metro does not really care. So in this, because everything's happened within the city limit, and there's no Caltrans or any entity involved. So for this project, really the only one that leads approval is the city council and Metro. So those two.
Terrific, thank you. Anyone else? Last call. Okay, great. Great questions, great discussion, interesting topic, much appreciated. Thank you so much. We will move on to the highlight of the evening. This is something that everyone who serves on a board here in Burbank needs to be familiar with, and if you were considering serving on a board or commission in Burbank, you may find this interesting as well. So we will turn it over to our city attorney's office for a presentation on the Brown Act and other topics.
Testing,
I don't see the
testing,
red.
testing.
Okay.
There we go.
I didn't see the light. All right, good evening, IOB, chair members of the IOB. My name is Kane Twin. I'm a senior assistant city attorney with the city attorney's office. And tonight, this is the transparency law basics agenda item. And really the purpose of this presentation is, we get members come in and, members come and go. And sometimes it's nice to have a refresher for those who are, existing and been here for a while. And also this is nice for those who are new here to kind of give them a sense of what the transparency laws require of you as a public official now. So we're going to go through thank you. So we're going to go through the holy trinity of transparency law here. We're not going to go super in-depth into each category, but the purpose is really to give you a sense of how the law works and basically to give you a sense of issue spot in the future. But we're going to talk about the Brown Act, conflicts of interest, and the Public Records Act, and afterwards I'll field any questions or hypotheticals you may have. But feel free if some of the slides are a little, you have a question for clarification or something pops up and you want to have a discussion then when it's fresh, feel free just to stop me and we could have that conversation then. So
That's on. That's on. Why are all those cars parked at City Hall?
This is not working. Oh my God, it was working. Hold on.
I knew I should put the slide with technical difficulties.
Let's see if we can start it up again.
All right. Let's try it again.
There we go.
Cool, thank you.
That's on. Why are all those cars parked at City Hall? Hi, caramba!
Welcome to this secret meeting made possible by the fake disaster drill. And now for the reason we are here. The results are in. This town has voted unanimously to get rid of Springfield's unending nightmare, The Simpsons.
No!
So I love The Simpsons, and I think this clip really illustrates, in a nutshell, what the Brown Act is all about, right? I mean, they're having a meeting in secret, didn't give The Simpsons any notice, and the purpose was to do something that affected their rights and try to exile them from the community, right? And so that's what the evil that the Brown Act is trying to prevent, right? So there's, two main elements of the Brown Act, right? If it is a meeting, right, of a legislative body such as IOB, then it must be open and public. So a meeting includes any gathering of a majority of the members of the board. So for you guys, 4 out of 7, right? At the same time and location, we're here right now traditionally in what you see as a traditional meeting, right? In a room with all the fancy, hardware that's associated with a public meeting. To hear, discuss, deliberate, or take action, and I think this is important to note that it's not just about taking action, it's about all the steps that lead to an action upon any item that is within your jurisdiction, right? So it makes sense, right? If we're trying to make a decision involving the public, you have the power to influence that, right? The public should be able to participate. And I really want to hit on your jurisdiction. This is what's pulled almost verbatim from the municipal code, right? Everything really related to infrastructure, right? An advisory function where you oversee, make recommendations to council about infrastructure, maintenance, best practices related to infrastructure, the annual review and recommendation to council that Ken always presents that big report with all the projects. An annual review of staff's recommended infrastructure funding priorities. I can never say this word right. Priorities, prioritization, and also to review the general fund's infrastructure-related expenditures. So if it's within those parameters, you as IOB members, if you guys are together as a majority, could influence decisions involving those points and influence the council in their decision-making as well. So, it's not every meeting's like this, right? I mean, the Brown Act's really trying to figure out, well, what happens if people don't encounter a meeting scenario, but they're not doing it right, like the way we're doing it here, right? So this is one example, right? Is this a meeting, right? And for the purposes of this slide, assume all these guys are public officials, they're board members of the IOB, right? So Mo is talking with Homer about something, and assume it's infrastructure related, right? Mo's talking to Homer about infrastructure, then Homer takes that same thought, talks to Lisa, and then Lisa takes that same thought and talks to Jenny. Well, under the Brown Act, you just had a meeting. Even though you're not in an official facility or whatever, you just had a meeting because there was 4 out of 7 members here. They were talking about infrastructure. Arguably, people say, well, is this really the same time and location? Well, really the point is, are they facilitating a contemporaneous discussion about something, right? And then, obviously, if it's about infrastructure within the jurisdiction. So that is a meeting that should have followed the open and public processes, but obviously didn't do it here, so they would have been in violation. The next scenario, kind of similar, again, same facts, they're all board members, but this one is not like the previous scenario, which is kind of a daisy chain telephone style type of informal meeting. This is Homer talking to Lisa, then Homer talking to Bart, and then Homer talking to Marge, all about infrastructure, right? This is what's commonly called a hub and spoke meeting, right? You're using one intermediary to facilitate a conversation with everyone else, and once you hit the point where a majority of the members have a conversation about infrastructure, well, that is also an example of violation. They should have had a formal meeting in that scenario. Really important too, meetings in the age of the internet, right? The Brown Act was developed, I think, in the 50s, and they didn't anticipate all these different ways where people could quote unquote meet, right? Online, virtually, whatever. One thing very important for the board members is email is an easy way to communicate, right? It's easy to reply people, be very casual, say something, and reply all, right? And so very often our staff sends out, whenever they send out materials, they try to make sure they BCC you guys and make sure they remind you, don't reply all, because the danger there is if you reply all about an infrastructure-related issue and then you start having a casual online email conversation, well, then that becomes a meeting that should have been following the proper processes, but it didn't happen, and that may be a violation, right? Facebook gets a special mention, or other online social media in general, because the law finally tried to catch up to technology, but then they went too far, right? So if the danger was having a majority of you online making a decision, right? The new law actually says, hey, you don't even need a majority. And I understand what they're trying to do there, but I think what what they're thinking is like, well, you're serving on a board together, you're spending time together. Very likely that you might be friends on a social media platform, right? And if one of you starts talking about infrastructure-related stuff, there's a high possibility that others who might be other board members who might be your friends might also then start chiming in, and that potentially could create a Brown Act violation. So they went so far to say even one like or one comment on your infrastructure-related post on your webpage potentially could be a Brown Act violation. So. But not every gathering is potentially a meeting subject to the Brown Act. For those of you who love The Simpsons like me, you know that there's a really great character named Disco Stu. And Disco Stu, all he wants to do is talk about disco and dance to disco, right? So if you're in the top left situation there, right, and assume that there's all 7 board members hanging out with Disco Stu right now, right? If you happen to be partying with Disco Stu, but you're not talking about infrastructure, right, then you're not making a decision. You can't, right? Because you're not collectively discussing something, right? You're just there for the love of disco, right? That's not a meeting. You're good, right? Now, if you all decide to have a drink in the back and then start talking about pavement and maintenance and whatnot, then that becomes a different story, right? Same thing with the bottom right depiction, right? Lyrics workshop with Tom Petty. Right? You guys could have interests. You guys could love music, right? If you're in a lyrical writing workshop with Tom Petty, not talking about infrastructure, right? Just talking about how to write songs. Who cares, right? Not a meeting. Very low risk of there being a violation, right? But if there's an infrastructure workshop with Tom Petty, and this example is really to highlight, some social bonding situation, right? Sometimes they want to do some bonding situation where all the members are out doing something like clay pottery or whatever, right? That potentially could be an issue if the conversation starts involving infrastructure, right? Again, not all gatherings are meetings. If you could always have one-on-ones with Ken or any member of staff, if you need details about things, that's fine because it's not involving a majority of the board. And more importantly, and I'm not going into every single possible exception to the Brown Act, but this is one of the more common ones. If you all want to attend the city council meeting, right, that's not going to be a Brown Act issue as well, right? Because presumably the city council meeting, they've already had a public agenda. They've already listed the items to be talked about. The only danger there is if the IOB decides to talk IOB outside of the city council's agenda, right? Then that becomes an issue. But if the city council has an IOB or infrastructure-related agenda item, you can go in, discuss public comment, and with your other fellow IOB members with you, and that's fine because it's presumably you're being fair and transparent there. There's an open meeting already. People know that infrastructure is going to be talked about in some way, right? So those are typical scenarios of gatherings that might or might not be meetings, right? So if it is a meeting, then what happens, right? Well, the requirements are it has to be open in public, right? And it's silly to say, but one of the first elements of being open in public, it has to be accessible. It has to be open for the public to get in, right? And it is really silly, but it happens, right? Sometimes, and recently, there was a meeting that happened at City Council Chamber, and the only way to get to City Council Chambers is to get onto an elevator that requires a key card access. And so, if you were an employee, you couldn't access the elevator, and if you couldn't access the elevator, you couldn't access city council chambers where they had that public meeting. So that was a big issue. That was a potential violation of Brown Act because the public couldn't even access the meeting even if they were interested in it, right? Another component of being open in public is, well, it has to be on an agenda, right? It has to be posted in a way that gives the public notice, right? It doesn't matter if, it has to be timely, right? I mean, it doesn't matter if you decide to post an agenda 10 minutes before the meeting because the public wouldn't have a reasonable opportunity to understand what's going on and come to the meeting, right? On the same note, it has to be reasonably described, right? If it is not reasonably described in a way that the public knows what's going to be talked about, well, then how do you know whether or not they want to participate, right? And mainly that's to make sure that the public, once they have the proper notice and can physically access your meeting, can come and do public comment like Marge here. Give their input, try to inform the decision makers, you guys, about how to view that particular decision that's before you. At least they have a voice, even if you rule against their interests, right? And so this is very important. So any action or discussion on an item not appearing on the agenda item, then it's generally prohibited, because if the public doesn't, if you're talking about something that's not on agenda, no one's ever given notice at that point, right? That defeats the whole purpose, right? That slide says, I guess we could cross hilarious joke off the agenda, but it is no joke. If it's not on the agenda, you can't talk about it. There are some exceptions, right, if something's not on the agenda, right? And they fall in these 6 categories. You can briefly respond to public statements or questions, ask a question for clarification, brief announcements, brief reports on your activities, ask staff about something, or refer staff to some sites, right? Or ask staff to bring something back, right? Those are the general categories. And so sometimes people wonder, well, what does the city attorney do at these meetings, right? Sometimes the city attorney looks really bored. Why is he closing his eyes, right? Well, really, the city attorney serves as an umpire here, right? And trying to figure out, well, where is this discussion going? Is it reasonably following the agenda, right? And if it isn't following the agenda, is it following one of these exceptions? And if both of those are no, then I would have to find a polite way to say, hey, maybe we need to get back on topic, right? I took some notes earlier about the questions about this life cycle of a sample capital improvement project, so I thought that was a good example right now. I liked how we were able to tie some of those questions back to, hey, that's an example to illustrate how the life cycle works, right? And as long as I could tie it back to the agenda item in a reasonable way, obviously, then then it's okay, right? But if in the FPPC or the DA is not going to ding you for having like a 10-second discussion on it, right? But if you go too far and it extends, longer than and you actually start having a real substantive discussion on things, well, the longer you go, the bigger risk is going to be, right? Yeah, and I think it's kind of important to note also, our agendas always have a public comment section. The public comment section is there to allow the public to always comment before any item is discussed or taken action on. So that's why it's almost always right up in front there. Sometimes it's right after roll call, but other times it's usually after the Pledge of Allegiance. But it's always one of the first items up there. And also, if we do have a section about talking about additional agenda items, that falls under that exception where you can ask staff to bring back something. But I want to remind staff, the board usually, that request involves an item that's within your subject matter jurisdiction, right? Otherwise, then there's no point. And the reason why it's important is there are consequences for violating the Brown Act, right? I'm more interested in the first one, right? Civil suits against the city. Why? Because that might trigger attorney's fees and they get expensive, right? But more importantly, an invalidation of an action. And the reason why that's important is, well, if someone could successfully argue that, hey, you made a decision outside of the transparency process, you have to redo it, right? And if you redo it, things might have changed between the decision time and now, right? Market conditions, right? The weather, who knows, right? But that potential delay can jeopardize your decision. Not to mention then staff would have to re-prepare that decision again so we correct that, whatever violation it was. The second one, I think, is probably more important for you. There is a criminal action element in there. If a public official acts in a way to intentionally deprive the public of information and violates the Brown Act, well, there are criminal penalties involved. And I'd like to say I've never really seen an example where someone goes to jail for violating the Brown Act. It is possible, so put that out there. So that wraps up Brown Act basics. Anyone have any questions about the Brown Act before I go into conflicts of interest?
Any questions? I just have one thing I'm curious about. When we talk about meetings must be accessible to the public, it sounds like, does that rule only apply to actually being physically accessible? Because I'm thinking about how I usually watch the meetings on, cable or YouTube, or people go on the city website after the meeting and watch the video. Is any of that part of the Brown Act in terms of what's required?
That's a great question, and a lot of that depends on what the state had decided as accessible, right? Like there's provision in there that says if someone doesn't understand English, right, you have to give them double the time for public comment so they can have a translator to help them kind of facilitate the public comment. Makes a lot of sense. But in terms of forcing a city to broadcast, I think our city really just does that. It's optional. It's really just a way to enhance transparency, but it's not a requirement. A lot of the Brown Act is just the bare basics of ensuring a process. And in some ways, it's a way to make sure someone has an investment in the proceeding. If they physically come, right, they're obviously gonna, it's gonna be more important to them that they can participate more meaningfully. But great question. It's not required. Some cities opt to do it, but it also is a resource question too.
Great, thank you.
Okay, then let's move on to conflicts of interest. So Monty says in here, I'm not in here for, or I'm not in this for personal gain. Well, that's the in a nutshell, purpose of conflicts of interest. I mean, you are trying to be public officials, but you're not doing this for yourself. There's higher purpose, right? There's three main categories of conflicts. And it's kind of interesting because, for different boards, different conflicts are happen more, I guess, often potentially than others. For ILB, it's mainly an advisory body. I mean, you don't we don't approve contracts here, for instance, right? So the opportunity for some of these interests to come into play is a rarer, right? But the first category of conflicts of interest is what's called the Political Reform Act or the financial conflicts of interest, right? No public official may participate or influence a decision that may result in a reasonably foreseeable and material effect on the financial interests of you or your immediate family. So I think that's the kind of something I always like to emphasize. Not just you and your financial interest, your spouse or partner, your dependent children. If there is a financial interest of you or theirs that comes before you and is some way related to the decision process, that's a potential conflict of interest. Now, the second category is the contractual conflict of interest. That really wouldn't come into play here because I don't think this body approves contracts. But for general knowledge, so if the whole idea is the board shouldn't have, or the public official and that related board shouldn't have a contractual interest in something that they're going to approve themselves. It's just self-dealing at that point. And then the third category is basically the catch-all, and I think might apply here, which is basically you can't participate or influence a decision if you cannot act disinterested on behalf of your public agency. As public officials, you have fiduciary duty to the public and the citizens in the city, right? So the idea there is, hey, if there's something that is so clearly would influence your decision making, so you cannot put the public's interest or the city's interest above your own, then that triggers a potential conflict of interest, and we should flag that, right? This slide is really on the financial conflicts of interest, the categories. I mean, I'm not gonna go too much in depth about that because I don't think we deal much with that, but it's basically like your employer, sources of income, your real property. If you decide on something that could increase or decrease your rental value or your ownership value of your property, things like that. There is one that's interesting for those if you eventually want to run for an elected office. Interest in a campaign donor of more than $500 within the past 12 months. Again, probably not going to happen or be triggered much with this board and this makeup, but it's just something to be aware of. And again, there are potential consequences for the city. Again, if someone challenges saying that, hey, we made a decision with financially interested or contractually interested members, then they could say, hey, we need to redo that decision because there was a self-interest injected in that, right? And that could lead to voiding of the decision, the contract, payment of attorney's fees. And similar to the Brown Act, right, for the public official, there are criminal penalties, right? There could be a misdemeanor penalty, again, rare. Potential loss of office, I think that is really the more serious thing. You can, if you're found guilty of, I'm not guilty, liable for violating the Political Reform Act, you could lose your office and never participate in elected office or public office ever again. So that's a serious penalty again. Takes a lot of steps to get there, but a potential consequence. And more commonly, fines for violations of conflicts of interest. So what should you do? Monty says, you tell me, you're my lawyer. Well, I'm not technically your lawyer, but I am the city's attorneys, and you are working on behalf of the city, so our interests align. To the extent we could protect everyone's decisions and give guidance and make sure everyone's doing things the right way, we're here to help. So if you do think there's a potential conflict of interest, whether big or small, right? You could feel free to ask staff or ask our office to give an opinion on that. And sometimes the answers are easy. We can tell you, hey, clearly that's not going to be a conflict, and don't worry about it. But other times, it's going to be a little more gray, right? And when that happens, our recommendation is always, hey, take the issue off the table, right? Remove yourself from the conversation. Just say, hey, I have a potential conflict. I haven't been able to verify whether it's in play or not, but out of the sake of transparency, I'm going to recuse myself for this decision, right? That involves kind of leaving the room for a little bit while everyone discusses the decision. But that's the way to really safeguard until we could get some type of more concrete guidance, or let's say an immunity letter from the FPPC that allows you to participate in that decision if is that important to you. So any questions about conflicts of interest? All right, then we'll go to the final part of the Holy Trinity here, the Public Records Act, right? And slide of Scully and Mulder, the truth is out there, right? You just have to find it in the document somewhere in City Hall, I guess. The Public Records Act, I think it was enacted probably around the 1970s, and it basically enshrines access to public records as a fundamental right of being a citizen of California. And so what's a public record? It's any writing containing information relating to the conduct of the public's business, prepared, owned, used, or retained by any state or local agency, regardless of physical form or characteristics. So this is important because, and Lisa's using this computer, right, in this slide. It's because records don't have to be physical, right? It doesn't have to be paper. It could be, and especially nowadays, it almost always is, emails or Word documents, PDFs, things of that nature. So, public records does not just cover physical documents in a file. It covers anything that potentially is in the city computer, right? So the general rule is that if it is a public record, right, they're open to public inspection at all times during the office hours of the agency, and everyone has a right to inspect any record except when there is an exemption, right? So I feel like a broken record. Sometimes I always have to remind city staff, it's like everything, unless you can articulate an exemption, you have to err on it being public and releasable. Now, what about personal emails and text messages, right? I mean, we talked about earlier, public records could be public records in any form or shape, right? Even if it's electronic. So in this hypothetical, let's say the city receives a request for all board and commission members' emails and text messages. Are these records subject to disclosure? And the answer is yes, even if it's on your private phone or your private email accounts, if it relates to city business. And the city, including board and commission members, have to take a reasonable effort to timely search and locate those responsive records. So imagine a situation, and I think this is a common one, right, where phones and laptops are such an important part of our lives now. I mean, we have it everywhere with us, including when we're at a meeting, right? If you are using your device during a meeting and that correspondence happens to be related to city business, not even just IOB business, but city business, right? That potentially is a public record. And so there is an obligation then to give those public records out unless obviously an exemption applies. Now the tough part is, well, how do we know that you have messages or whatever public records on your phone and email? Well, sometimes it's tough, right? We will have to rely on you representing to us, hey, I'm looking through my phone, I found X, Y, and Z, and they aren't public records. And then ultimately, staff will take a review of it and make a final determination as to whether those are records that have to be given out to the public or not. But we still have to go through the process. And the reason why there's a bullet point about consequences is the Supreme Court case that established this rule did say, hey, if your official does not cooperate with you, I mean, we, speaking as the judges here, we know they're not employees of the city, right? And you can't really force them to pull out their phone and give you all the records. But if there's a lawsuit, that litigant can actually add you to the lawsuit and say, hey, they're not giving us records. They have an obligation as a public official to do so. Now, you potentially may be a party to a records lawsuit, right? So that's really the pitfall to be aware of if you do use phones. Well, yeah, potentially you might have public records in there, and potentially you might be asked. And if that happens, sometimes you might have to give them out, even if it is embarrassing. So that concludes my brief Transparency 101 presentation. I'll take any other questions you have about Brown Act, conflict, PRA, if they arose during this time.
Got a question regarding social media.
Sure.
And liking, what I imagine, a post of someone. I guess how would that work, and how would we have an issue if, I guess, for example, if a member of the board posted something in one direction or the other regarding an infrastructure issue, and then another member likes it? Is that where we have that problem?
Yeah, so a lot of this stuff is self-enforcing, right? I mean, someone sees the post and then sees another board member like it. I mean, that's when it'd be like, hey, that's improper, that's against the rules, right? And that's why it's like, well, a lot of this is knowledge of the potential issues is half the battle, right? Being aware of, what you're posting, who's interacting on your page, right? I mean, it's not, social media goes by so quickly sometimes that it's hard to keep control over all of it, but that's why you have to be mindful. Like if, I don't know which board members are Facebook friends here, right? But if someone has an issue, so infrastructure related, and posts about it, you should be mindful not to participate, at least to that thread, and save it for a meeting. If you're really interested in discussing that topic, probably the best practice would be to email one of staff, maybe Ken, and say, hey, I know there might be some potential discussion on this. Can we agendize that? And then that way, all the members could talk about it when a meeting occurs.
If I could follow up on Board Member Weber's question, what I see many times is on Reddit or in a Facebook group, like specifically related to City of Burbank and what's happening in Burbank. Many times something is said, and let's say a member of City Council or a member of another board will come in as and representing who they are, they're not anonymous, and say, well, here's really what's happening with that. So is there any type of concern about providing that type of clarification? Again, not necessarily saying an opinion, but saying, yeah, the Starlight Bowl is under review, or something along those lines.
Yeah, that's a great question for many reasons, right? I think really the purpose of those social media rules was really thinking about Facebook, right? And that type of easy interaction, likes, dislikes, commenting. Reddit, I mean, I might not be that savvy too, but I mean, it seems like it's like a bulletin board type of thing. I don't know. I mean, it depends on, are they actually facilitating the discussion? Are they actually, has action already occurred, and it's just explaining what was already in the staff report and decided? I don't know. It really depends on the...
Reddit is basically discussions. I mean, people will post like, hey, what's happening? Or have what's the status on this? Or I really want more bike lanes. Or, they throw things out, and then everybody kind of piles on and discusses it. And sometimes there's some really great discussions, and sometimes they just fly off into the ozone. But I've seen, members of city council or members of certain boards step in and try to moderate in the sense of, okay, here's what's really happening. I know all of you are kind of guessing, but here's what the decision was, or here's when it's going to be on an agenda. So that they try to help the discussion and not necessarily state an opinion, but try to provide facts.
Yeah, I'd say it really depends then, and the more there's potential other members interacting, I mean, the bigger the problem, right? But again, that provision is mainly, it was really targeting Facebook, and very common, state legislators don't understand an issue, or they're slow to react to technology or whatever, and so they do the best they can. I could look into that issue a little bit more, but my understanding is it was more like a format similar to Facebook, where you could like post really easily, share really easily. It's in the purpose of it is to engage and facilitate this long discussion conversation. I mean, and that's where the council member or other public official is supposed to not refrain from commenting or liking in that situation.
Madam Chair, may I? So I have a question for our senior city attorney here. To Board Member Weber's comment, the way we advise commission and committee and board members to act in public if they want to express an opinion is always, which we see is I'm representing myself as a member of this, as a citizen of Burbank. And I think if board members like or participate in a discussion, there's always the defense of I am acting on my own behalf as a citizen, as opposed to I am not representative of the Infrastructure Oversight Board, and maybe even as long as they don't identify themselves as a board member in, say, a Reddit thread, is that okay?
Yeah, and that's a great. I wouldn't even. I think that's more of a clarification than a question, but I think that's definitely a best practices, right? And so one of the common issues would be, a board member or a commissioner would come in when there's a city council meeting and they'll publicly identify themselves and be like, I'm representing so-and-so board. Well, the danger there really is, did the board or commission take action and authorize you to be their mouthpiece for your particular issue, right? Because that's what it's implying, and if there was an agenda item that did that, then that raises the question of whether or not you violated the Brown Act in representing yourself as the representative of the board, right? So always, as a good practice, you could always participate in city council meetings, but if there's an agenda item involving your jurisdiction, right? But best practice is good to identify yourself as a member of that board, and you could tell them your public comment based on that, and as opposed to you representing, this is the collective consensus or the advice of that board or commission.
I have a question related to, I guess, version history and some of in particular, the appendices in the document that was distributed to us today. I haven't had an opportunity to really read through them, but I'll read the title of it. Appendices of sections with additional changes effective in the years of 2026 through 2030. So just on my skim of that, it looks like there are certain things that will sort of go into place in 2026. Just for example, Appendix A is effective 2026. So is B, and then just kind of skipping later on, C is 2026 again. And D is effective January 1st, 2030. I don't mean to sort of quicksand us on what is it and why is it and that kind of thing, but as a board, how should we navigate these sections that sort of come into effect in the future?
Well, the good news is a lot of these Brown Act procedures, it will be something that staff in the city attorney's office will work on and make sure we're doing it the right way. A lot of it applies to us, making sure we're arranging the meetings and the agendas in the right way. A lot of these changes, like you mentioned, I didn't look through every single one of the dependencies, but mainly it's the aftermath of COVID. Right? I mean, after COVID, there's certain emergency exceptions, there's certain teleconferencing exceptions. You could use Zoom in certain situations, right? And so when they did that, they're like, well, we're only going to do this for X amount of years, and it's going to sunset at a certain point, and then we're going to replace it with something else, right? So a lot of these are just kind of cleanups. There's a relatively new teleconferencing rule about just cause or emergency exceptions, and they've been tweaking it like almost every year, every other year. So these things come into influx, but usually that's our job and priority is when these changes happen, we become aware of it, and we'll try to, reorganize or implement processes that are consistent with those new changes.
Okay, that clears the air a great deal. Thank you. And just on the, am I interpreting it correctly that there's a gradual rollout of certain appendix items? Is this how it would work typically?
The appendix, I think that's just how they organize the information here. if you want to go on Leginfo, that's usually the legislature's official website that tells you what the laws are. But sometimes it's confusing because they'll have one section that says, this is effective, 2024, and then they'll have another section with the same number, and it says this is effective 2025. And so sometimes you could really easily get confused as to which one is really in play if you're using the same citation number. So I think this is just a way for them to organize, hey, we're putting the ones that are coming in later in the appendix as opposed to in text, so it wouldn't confuse you in case you only read the first 8 subsections and not the next one that says it only happens in 2030 or whatever.
Yeah, I guess in the context of some of the questions and comments we've had regarding, social media and other ways of interacting with people, it's probably a good idea for all of us to ensure that we're kind of keeping up with the evolution of things post-COVID, with other ways of communicating with each other. So yeah, makes perfect sense. Thank you.
Yeah, COVID has really changed a lot and has, in both the frequency and the substance of some of these rules, and has forced a lot of cities to actually, change some of their processes just to accommodate that unique situation. But that's also, that reminds me of a great, another great topic to talk about. Sometimes I know the board members have certain questions, but it's hard to tie it specifically to the agenda item at hand, and staff usually says, "Oh well, hey, just email us separately, and we could go ahead and give you that information outside the meeting." That's always a really good practice, right? Sometimes I think in our desire to kind of understand a lot of the context of the situation, we ask a lot of questions, and sometimes that, to me, starts going a little bit, past the reasonable scope of the agenda item. So I always think that's something to always be aware of, like. If you guys could have that exercise in your head, like, are these comments reasonably related to the agenda item as described? And if not, well, I could always, the better option for me is, instead of asking for staff to give an answer right then and there, is like, hey, I'm interested in this. It might not be, totally on topic here, but I would like you to send me some more information on this individually. I mean, that way you get your own information and you don't potentially trigger a collective discussion on something that's not on the agenda.
Anyone else? Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for an informative and educational and entertaining presentation of these topics. I had a question in the transparency section on public records on personal devices. Is there an affirmative obligation to retain those for any length of time? Are we subject to the city's records retention policy, or for cleaning out email, can we delete stuff?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I always tell people, well, we're focusing on the Public Records Act because that's really what's really applicable to you as public officials. But there's really another component to it. It's a records retention requirement, right? Like Public Records Act is really like, hey, if there is a public record that exists, then what, right? When someone asks for it. But a Records Retention Act tells you, hey, we're going to tell you when you have to keep a record if it exists, right? So it's a little bit different. That's more of a staff-driven process, and there's a lot of different rules as to minimum times and what happens when you get a photocopy of it, what happens if you put it in a database or whatever. So, a lot of potential nuances to that. But the general rule, I think, especially for you as IOB members, if, for instance, I think this is the easiest type of example, is if someone emails you and asks you a question about your position as an IOB member, right? Potentially, I think that would be a public record because you're talking about city business and you're talking about your particular position as an IOB member on infrastructure, right? So in a situation of that, that might be something that has to be retained, but you don't necessarily need to retain it under the records retention law. So the best practice would be, if you think it is a public records and it should be retained, is to email it to staff. Right. And some cities have their own separate email accounts for all the board members and commissioners. I don't know if Burbank, I'm pretty sure Burbank doesn't provide emails to everybody. But so that would have been one way to resolve that issue, is if you think it's public record, use your official account as opposed to your personal account. Right. But if you don't have an official account, again, if you email it to one of the staff members, then it gets put into the city's own processes, which does store and retain information.
Thank you.
Anyone else? No? Okay, thank you so much. That was, I agree, very entertaining and interesting and educational. and always good for old and young board members to hear. So,
Thanks, everyone.
okay, any introduction of additional agenda items? Okay, future agenda items, Mr. Berkman?
Yes, Madam Chair, board members, just a couple of things to touch upon. We will have our special meeting for the Central Library tour in May, as I did last year. Just not to get into a discussion, but I wanted to make sure we have a potential quorum. Ms. Rosales would send out an email to verify this. We are looking at Tuesday, May 13th, from 3 to 5 p.m. That's a date and time we've confirmed with the library services director and staff. I just wanted to check to make sure we potentially had a quorum. Anybody, say, out of town? Are there any conflicts right now for board members? And we will email everyone blind copy to confirm.
Did you want us to respond right now?
Well, I think the only thing I was looking for is anybody knows if they're on vacation, that's all.
Okay.
I'm not seeing anybody out of town, so we'll start there, and we can confirm a quorum via email, and as we did with the TMC, the Transportation Management Center, if we need to have individual or tours by 2 or 3, a non-quorum, then that would be okay. But I just wanted to throw that out there so you can kind of pre-plan, and you'll be ready for that email.
Thank you.
As Mr. Shu said, we're on schedule to provide the PMP, the Pavement Management Plan, for June. I did want to highlight the BRT project update will probably not be back for a while. If you were watching the City Council meeting from this past Tuesday, Vice Mayor Takahashi asked to bring the City Council's position letter back for discussion. I'll certainly keep the board apprised on a date when that is scheduled for council. Other than that, that concludes my comments. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, so we will be having our next meeting then, hopefully on May 13th, for a tour of the Central Library. And then our regularly scheduled meeting would be on May 22nd, so we'll have 2 meetings next month.
We will, if we are able to do the May 13th meeting, we would take the May 22nd off the agenda. Save you some time.
Terrific. Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you, everyone. Really good meeting, really good discussion, questions as always. So appreciate everybody, and have a good evening. Good night. We are adjourned.